Oh, hold on, everyone, I'm coming. Sorry, there was a lot of smoke in here. Almost there. Okay, there we go. Whew. I had to fight my way through the fire to get through that one, chat. But I am here now. And welcome, those of you who are here. Teradito, Tia, nice to see both of you again. Today, I decided to stream to you all from the depths of hell. That's right. Figured it would be kind of a new challenge for me, you know? Taking on a new streaming location today that fits so well with the topic for today's stream. So how's everyone doing today? I hope that you're doing well. Hope you're having a nice day. I think... Morning, Axaeon. How are you? Oh god, it burns. It burns. Yeah. Sorry if those of you who are watching can feel the heat from your computer screens. I do apologize. I'd say I'm doing fine today. Been having a good day so far. A little bit warm, you know, right now, but still I'm doing fine overall. Fortunately, I am the kind of person who gets cold more easily than I get hot. And so right now, I won't lie, it is hot. But so far I'm managing to handle it. And part of the reason why I decided to stream on this topic for today, which you might have already guessed, has to do with the stream yesterday when I introduced that I'm going to be doing some spooky season streaming for this month. Not that hell necessarily is maybe the first thing people think of when it comes to spooky season, but I do think there are a lot of connections, certainly with a lot of the imagery when it comes to things like demons and so on. But also, I think on a more abstract level, the idea of hell is itself something that has inspired a great deal of fear in people, has been used for the purposes of inspiring fear. And particularly with, I did not know this was going to be the same day, but I noticed Karis was streaming earlier today, Karis Ufrenor, about fear. And it just makes a nice little synergy, a nice little serendipity there. But I thought, given all the connections between that one could draw between hell and spooky season, that I might talk about some philosophy involving the idea of hell. Teradito says, though, this is where ethics experts go to, huh? I expected more lawyers. Oh, no, I ran into some lawyers on the way over here, like making my way over here to chat with you all. So, yeah, they're down here too. But yeah, definitely lots of ethics experts down here as well. Yep, seems like you find a lot of interesting people down here. Yeah, I definitely recommend at least popping by for a visit someday. It's one of those places, you know, if you die without like going to visit here at least once, like what are you even doing, you know? So for today, it will probably be a relatively short stream because again, it is kind of hot down here, but also I just have one piece to read for today, a piece that I wrote a while back on this topic. And then I was thinking after I read it, perhaps we could discuss it for a bit so people can bring up any thoughts, any questions, any objections that they have. CTFAir says, Axaeon stream 2 days in a row and Karis stream today. Philosophers eating good this weekend. That's right. Yeah, Karis and I, we really try, you know. we try to bring all of the top quality philosopher VTuber content that you've come to expect here on YouTube. It's a hard job, but you know, somebody's got to do it. But no, I love this so much. Thinking of new stream ideas and getting to interact with you all on stream, it is just amazing. Like, I'm really so happy that I get to do this. No, justice is a heavenly virtue. Yeah, maybe you'd fit a little more naturally in heaven. I can't say I have much experience of heaven. Maybe I should go there next, or maybe I should do like a philosophy stream on that next. But so far, at least, my life has taken me more to interacting with hell, you might say. And the piece that I'm going to read to you for today is one that I hope you all would like. In fact, before I start reading it, I'm just going to go ahead and post a link to it, because I realize some of you might want to follow along. And I think last time I did one of these reading streams, I kind of forgot to post the link in chat. So people had to just kind of follow along and then hope they remembered it later. But no, this time I am not going to forget. I am going to remember to post the link. So here it is. But no peeking though, okay? It's not any fun if you peek. So here is the link. Again, this post was titled On Hell and Christian Universalism. I'm going to make it a pinned message, so that way you all can see it pretty easily. Do we get Axaeon streams in heaven? Maybe so. I mean, I'll probably still be streaming from hell, but if you're in heaven watching it, then sure, why not? One thing, since you mentioned hell being scary and evaded for people, made me kind of notice heaven and hell ruling by love and ruling by fear stuff. Yeah, there is kind of a duality there. I think that's a solid observation, Terraditto. Absolutely. Yeah, we better, or I'm staying here. So, let me take you all now to a place that is perhaps a bit less warm, and we will see if we can do a little bit of reading together. This is one thing that I once told my students at the end of a philosophy of religion class, is that if you are sad that class is ending, do not fear, because we can still have philosophy class in hell. And they seem to take great comfort in that. So I'm glad I can comfort people when I can. So right, here we go. Yeah, that's a little better. A little bit less warm. Except, oh, well, if I do it on this screen, this is my normal gaming screen. I guess I'll have to set up a capture just for the window. I'll tell you what, let's go somewhere slightly different. Here we go. OBS again. I feel like this is a bonus feature of any stream where this happens, is where you all get to see OBS. A peek behind the scenes. So you get to see what it really looks like. But alas, we do not need to see OBS. Instead, we need to see... Oh, there's my desktop background. Yep. You can tell I'm extra exciting when it comes to desktop backgrounds because I used one of the default images. I saw this default image and I was like, hey, that's kind of cool. With the little tint there kind of lit up in the field. So I decided to go with that one. Hope you all like it. But what I'd actually like to show you is... Here it is, the post that I am going to read to you for today. And then this is, again, yeah, the title of this is On Hell and Christian Universalism. Subtitle, What Structure of Afterlife Would a Loving God Create? This was my best attempt to make one thing Substack has is like a cool little generator for images. This was my best attempt to capture an image of hell. I don't know if it fully captured hell's essence, because like these people down here seem like they're doing okay. It seems maybe more like explorers kind of visiting a volcano. But, you know, I'll take it. Maybe that's just kind of this interpretation of hell, you might say. So here again is the piece titled On Hell and Christian Universalism. So now I shall begin reading. When, as a teenager, I was first evaluating whether Christianity might be true, I was torn in two directions. On one hand, the truth of Christianity would have meant the promise of an afterlife, which was something I wholeheartedly wished for. Absent some god or other, it seemed almost certain to me that non-existence would, in the wake of death, be every person's eternal fate, and that struck me as tragic. On the other hand, the doctrine of hell, of people's being subjected to suffering without end, simply for not having arrived at the right religious beliefs. Footnote, or more precisely, for the combination of one, having sinned, no matter how slight, how finite the sins, nor how strongly the sins might appear to be outweighed by the good one has done, and two, not having arrived at the right religious beliefs. Seemed to me so unconscionable so irredeemably cruel that I could not bring myself to believe that any loving God, for that matter, any God with the slightest shred of decency, would create such a system. In the end, it was the latter of these two considerations that won out. I decided that even if the Christian God were to exist, any God monstrous enough to cast even a single person into eternal flames was a God I wanted nothing to do with. Footnote: in the time since, I've learned that similar sentiments have been behind many other people's rejection of Christianity. Indeed, among those who find Christianity aversive, hell is often apparently what's felt to be the most objectionable element. At that time in my life, the doctrine of hell seemed to me to be simply part of the package of Christianity. Certainly this was the view of the Church of Christ, the denomination with which my school was affiliated, and I had never come across any Christians who believed otherwise. More recently, though, I've learned of versions of Christianity that reject hell, or at least an eternal hell. Annihilationism, according to which after death, those who rejected God in life will cease to exist altogether, and universalism, according to which all people, regardless of what religious beliefs they had in life, will ultimately go to heaven and be with God. Here I'll mostly set annihilationism aside, as it seems to me to be less widely believed and discussed than universalism, as well as less strikingly and interestingly a departure from the more traditional infernalist version of Christianity, the version which holds that unbelievers are sent to hell to suffer everlastingly. That said, the point I'll argue for below, a point conditionally in favor of universalism and against conditionally in favor of universalism and against infernalism, I also believe to be a point against annihilationism. While hell certainly isn't the only point of contention in evaluating Christianity, it is a major one. To the extent that Christians opt for universalism over infernalism, their view will appear much less cruel, and in that way be more plausible. In this post, I'll share an additional reason why Christians should be universalists. Footnote here, just pointing out another source. Footnote 4. Admittedly, this is not a debate I consider myself an expert on, and it seems to me quite likely that someone, somewhere, has already made the point I'm about to argue. But I hope that this post will nevertheless manage to develop the idea in a somewhat distinctive way, along with bringing it to an audience who might not have encountered it already. This is where I get to the body of the paper, or the piece. Anti-arbitrariness as a reason for universalism. According to the standard infernalist story, it's possible to escape being fated to suffer in hell. What's required for this goes under various descriptions, such as believing in God, accepting Christ, repenting from sin, being saved, and so on. However, while all this allows you to steer clear of hell, there's a catch. You have to do these things before you die. If you don't manage to have the proper beliefs by the time death greets you, then you'll be damned to hell, where you'll suffer for the rest of eternity. With this in mind, I'd like to offer what strikes me as a reason for universalism. Quite apart from the sheer excessiveness and cruelty of everlasting punishment, there appears to be something arbitrary about setting one's death as the moment by which one must have arrived at the beliefs on which hang one's fate. Why must one have arrived at the right religious beliefs by the moment of one's death, rather than some other time? In particular, a later time. Why not, say, a week, a day, a week, a month, a year, after one has died? Some might reply that death is a convenient, easy-to-remember place to mark the point at which your decision must be made. The trouble with this response, though, is that considerations like convenient and easy to remember fail to apply when we're dealing with an omnipotent, omniscient being. And it's not as if God couldn't set the deadline later. Given that one's soul, on most Christian views, and certainly the infernalist view, will continue to exist after one has died, there wouldn't seem to be any impossibility in having one's deadline for accepting God be set for some time after death. Again, then, we face the question of why God should set such a deadline at death rather than some other later time. To better appreciate the intuitive force of this point, I find the following analogy helpful. Imagine that a teenager who dislikes her parents decides to run away from home at 16. Shortly after her 18th birthday, though, she changes her mind about her parents, wishes to reconnect with them, and reaches out to them. Alas, they inform her that, as she's now past her 18th birthday, they're not interested. Sorry, but you should have tried to reconnect with us before turning 18. If you had done so even one day before turning 18, we would have been willing to have you back in our lives. But since you didn't want to have us in your life at the moment you turned 18, you can never have a relationship with us again. Such a response, both in the insanity of its overreaction and, more to the point here, its arbitrariness, seems to me analogous to God's making death the deadline for deciding whether to believe in him, on pain of being damned to hell if one gets the wrong answer. Some might object to this analogy. For instance, one could object that 18 is when one legally becomes an adult, and thus is not an arbitrary deadline. This objection forgets, however, that the legal age of adulthood is itself at least somewhat arbitrary. The American legal system could very well have decided on some other age to mark adulthood, such as 16, 17, 19, or 20, just as adulthood is legally recognized at different ages in other countries. It's of little help in defending against an arbitrariness charge to appeal to a standard that is itself at least partly arbitrary. And then, more deeply, setting the above point aside, how would considerations of the moment one becomes an adult even come close to justifying such an extreme response on the part of the parents? Second, one might object that, from the way the analogy is described, we have no indication that the parents communicated their deadline to the daughter in advance, whereas with God, the deadline for belief is communicated in advance, through the Bible, religious teachings, and so on, and that this is an important difference. But even if we stipulate that the parents in the example do communicate the deadline in advance, that doesn't explain what the rationale for setting the deadline at the daughter's 18th birthday is, nor for maintaining such a deadline so strictly, especially given that the stakes are so dire. Consider for a moment, would being able to add, "Sorry, but we told you that you had to reach out to us by the time you turned 18, really make the parents' reaction no longer insane? Above, I wondered why it wouldn't make more sense for God to set the deadline for belief at a week, month, or year after one has died. To this, one might of course point out that such alternative deadlines would themselves be arbitrary, especially in light of how one's soul will exist eternally, and thus allow infinitely many possible deadlines. However, while there's an element of truth to that, setting a post-death deadline of some sort would arguably have an advantage over setting it at death. With a post-death deadline, after all, one would get to experience the afterlife, possibly including hell, for at least some time before one's final decision must be made. In that way, one's final decision would be more informed in an important way than if one had to make the decision without having gotten to experience the afterlife at all. But more truly, it's simply not clear why there'd have to be any deadline for belief at all, given the arbitrariness of any such deadline. Why not instead leave the door always open for any once wayward souls who, after however many lifetimes, have a change of heart? Objection: the appeal to faith. I'd now like to consider what strikes me as the most likely objection to the above argument for universalism. The central idea behind the objection is one I've mostly encountered in a different context, in particular as a response to the question, why doesn't God provide us with clearer evidence of his existence. But it's relevant here as well, an appeal to the value of faith. That is, some would object that if God lets you wait till after your death to decide whether to believe in him, then simply from getting to see the afterlife, you'll already have, for all practical purposes, proof of his existence. And consequently, your believing in him would no longer be a choice. It'd be unfree, forced, precluded from being a matter of faith. Thus, the objection goes, the reason God sets the moment of your death as the deadline for belief is to preserve the possibility of having your belief in him be genuinely an article of faith, rather than simply the more everyday kind of belief you have about the existence of most other things, such as tables, trees, and other people. I see multiple problems with this objection. First, if we view faith in the way the objection does, as belief on, if not the absence of evidence altogether, then at least incomplete evidence, or lesser evidence than we have for most other things we believe, then it's unclear why believing on faith is supposed to be such a good thing. Why would it be virtuous to believe on incomplete or insufficient evidence exactly? If anything, being inclined to such belief would more plausibly be a vice. Footnote, a position most famously associated with William K. Clifford. Further, if it's so crucial that our belief in God be a matter of faith, then what about all the people in heaven who have direct experience of God, and thus can no longer have their belief in him be a matter of faith? Wouldn't we have to say, if faith is paramount, that it's bad that people in heaven can't have faith anymore? An admission which would, in turn, go against the notion of heaven as a place of perfection. Lastly, God makes his presence directly known to many people in the Bible. The most dramatic such encounter I can think of is that involving Saul on the road to Damascus. And Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest, and desired of him letters to Damascus to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. And the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. And Saul arose from the earth, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no man, but they led him by the hand, and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and neither did eat nor drink. If, in such encounters, God wasn't wrongly violating a person's freedom to choose belief, or to have such belief be based on faith, then it's unclear why the same wouldn't hold true if God let erstwhile unbelievers choose, after they've experienced a bit of the afterlife, possibly including hell, whether to ultimately accept him and go to heaven. Final section. Why I'm writing about this. What stake do I, as someone who is not a Christian, have in the debate between universalism and infernalism? Part of my reason for writing about this, of course, is just that I find such issues, along more generally with issues of what claim such and such camp should accept to make their view more plausible, interesting to think about, and that such interest is probably simply part of being a philosopher. But more significantly, I believe that if Christians in general gave up infernalism in favor of universalism, that would make for a more humane religion, and thereby, in an important way, a more humane world. How much less anguish would there be in families and friends divided over the Christian faith, were the stakes understood not to include the non-believer's eternal torture? In moments when religion comes up among those so divided, the immediate tension and tearful pleading that sometimes follow betray the depth of hurt that lurks within the hearts of those who believe, those who feel it their desperate duty to steer their loved ones away from endless, excruciating torment. I've long suspected that those who show such urgency in their attempts to convert, the ones who are willing to show sudden emotion, to breach social norms around avoiding tense subjects, to bear their own beliefs with a fullness and immediacy that would make others feel intolerably exposed, or those who understand most clearly the dire implications of their views. No belief system should ask of its adherents that they embrace a God who would torture their loved ones forever. And no belief system should force non-adherents into a situation where they must accept that their loved ones would, on some level, support their being tortured forever. In the end, the stakes in the debate between universalism and infernalism concern everyone who wishes for the world to be a place of greater love, and for people to believe in a way that is consonant with love. And that is the end of this piece. Again, I'll leave the link pinned in the chat for anybody who wants to have it on hand. But for right now, let us return, very aptly, to the depths of hell. So thank you all for listening to that piece, for following along with me. So now I will be super curious to know if anybody has any thoughts on that piece, thoughts that you'd like to share. I know some of you might have already been posting them in the comments. I have not gotten a chance to look at the comments yet when I was reading, but why don't we take a look now and see what people have been saying. So it looks like the first one from when I started reading is Tia, who says, "What do you think about hell as a tool for social engineering? We want people to make up their mind before they die because we want them to behave pro-socially while they're still around in this life." So yeah, I have mixed feelings on this. I'll just say a few things. One of them is that I don't doubt that ideas like hell could be used to, let's just say, induce certain pro-social behaviors. That is the fear of going to hell. Like if you teach people, oh, like if you steal and kill and so on and mistreat others and speak ill of others, then God will send you to hell. Maybe that could be one motivation for people to refrain from stealing and to refrain from telling lies and to refrain from other bad behaviors like that. So like all of that seems at least somewhat plausible to me. However, I think that the idea of hell comes with such downsides in terms of the anguish that it causes people, like especially in families divided over religion, and to children who are taught the idea and who live in a state of fear that if they'll go to hell or if people they know will go to hell. I think that's absolutely awful. And so what I would say is when it comes to inducing those pro-social behaviors, and you might agree or disagree with this, I'm not making any implications about what your view might be, but my view at least would be that we should find other ways to motivate people to behave pro-socially. And I realize this gets into questions of human nature. I think somebody who would argue that ideas like hell are necessary to motivate people to behave well, or more generally that punishments are necessary to motivate people to behave well, I think that would probably be somebody who has a pretty negative view of human nature, because I could see how those two would go together. Me personally, I have a more positive view of human nature. I think that if we just give people certain conditions, like conditions of freedom, for example, if we put people in environments, or if we let people at least grow up in environments where they're accepted for who they are, I think most people turn out quite well and will just naturally want to treat others well, will naturally want to be pro-social. So that kind of goes into my views on hell when it comes to this purpose too, and that it seems to me that hell just, the idea of hell, teaching people about hell just really isn't necessary, and that we can help people behave pro-socially in ways that are much more positive and don't have nearly the same costs. Oh, I see you have a follow-up comment to that, Tia, saying, not saying that hell is an effective tool for this, probably not, but that seems more plausible than arguing for or against hell along metaphysical lines. Maybe so. I'm going to read that again to make sure I'm parsing it right. So it seems more plausible to you that hell is an effective tool for motivating pro-social behavior than arguing for or against hell along metaphysical lines. Yeah, I mean, that brings up an interesting point, which is like what arguments specifically against hell there might be. Because I know, like, when I think about, like, if somebody asked me, like, why don't you believe in hell? The first thing I would want to say is, well, I just reject the entire religious framework that hell sort of comes along with. Oops. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to. I see you say that's not what I meant. Stop. Okay. I apologize for misinterpreting you, Tia. Feel free to clarify in the comments in a second. But to go back to what I was saying a second ago, yeah, I think that, yeah, my first reaction would just be like, yeah, I reject the whole entire religious framework, and I'd be happy to share, of course, arguments that I have against the existence of God. And so those, you might say, like, if at least if they're arguments against the kind of God for, you know, in religions that involve the idea of hell, such as like in infernalist versions of Christianity, then I guess the non-existence of hell would just kind of go along with that, would kind of follow as a result of the non-existence of that kind of God. Or at least it would be a really strange view if you believed that, like, there didn't exist any kind of God who implements a regime of hell, but, like, nevertheless there is still a hell. I guess strictly speaking, it would be like those are logically compatible. Like, there could be a hell even if there's no God. Like hell is just part of the sort of natural afterlife, so to speak. Though I don't know if anybody has that view. At least I've never encountered anybody who has that view. It would be, again, a really strange view. I would be kind of curious, though, like if somebody did think that way, like, I would be really intrigued to ask them why it is that they feel that way. Let's see, TP Ninja says, perhaps since it's at the end of the day regarding the existence of hell for those who believe in it. Well, I think I might be missing some of the context on that one. Yeah, feel free to add more to that if you'd like, but it looks like maybe that was the kind of comment that it can only be understood in the context of when it was posted. Terradito says, yeah, what Tia said, while universalism seems to provide personal relief, it would weaken the punitive aspect of hell and give less consequences to being disruptive to society. Well, I suppose you could say if there is no hell, then in some important sense, maybe the consequences of being disruptive to society are reduced. Although I guess I don't know if I really... It gets kind of complicated around here. Because on one hand, like, let's say that you have a view according to which only belief in God, belief in the right God, is necessary for getting to heaven. Well, then, like, in principle, you could be, like, as disruptive to society as you want, or, like, as disruptive to society as anyone. And as long as you maybe, like, repent of those ways before you die, and, like, by the time you die, you come to genuine belief, like, then you'll still go to heaven. And so it's not clear, like, if there would be any consequences in the afterlife for one's, you know, bad behavior then. But I guess another view would be you could reject the infernalist version of Christianity, but still believe, that is, reject the, like, really traditional eternal hell of Christianity, of, like, the kind of strong infernalist versions, but still believe in a hell of some sort. Maybe it could just be like a temporary hell. Like, depending on how badly you acted in life, maybe you are sent to hell for a shorter or longer period of time, but then, like, once you've sufficiently been punished, like, at that point, you get to go to heaven. So that's a view one could have. And if one did have that view, then I think that, yeah, there would still be, I guess you might say, consequences in the afterlife for bad things done during life. I suppose that kind of view might be attractive, especially to retributivists. It's like people who think that if you act wrongly, then the punishment is something deserved. Like it's intrinsically good for you to face punishment for wrong things that you've done, like just as a matter of justice. So for those who have that kind of retributivist view, I think the notion of hell, maybe not an eternal hell, but like at least a somewhat, time-bounded hell, might be somewhat attractive to them. I'm not a retributivist myself, and especially if we're thinking in terms of the afterlife, it's just not entirely clear to me why punishment would be necessary. I think that when it comes to people who do very bad things, certainly those people need something. Maybe like I'm trying to think, like if I were God and I could have the power to do whatever I wanted with those people, I would do whatever was necessary to sort of help them see the truth, like whatever truth they're missing out on why those actions are bad, or to help them understand, even if it's just on an emotional level, like to understand the wrongness of their behaviors. And then once that was done, I wouldn't see any need for anything else. Now, I do think that if somebody had committed, like, say, lots of heinous actions, but was then made to understand, like to fully grasp the wrongness of what they had done, I think that the natural result of that would be feeling very guilty, like feeling awful about what they had done. So you could say maybe that's a punishment in its own right. In fact, there's a classic line from John Stuart Mill about this, about how when we think that somebody has acted wrongly, we sort of hope for there to be some kind of punishment, even if it's just the punishment like in their own private conscience of sort of the guilt that they feel. So yeah, I do think that feeling that kind of guilt would be a natural result of if one came to understand fully the wrongness of how one had been living. So let's see. So like a Hobbes perspective, I suppose, for the more negative view of human nature. Yeah, that's a fair comparison to make. Certainly Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, did not have the most positive view of human nature. He thought that if people were left to their own devices, if they were not, under the control of, or at least subject to the strict restrictions imposed by a strong government, a strong leader, like in particular a strong authoritarian government, then the result would just be a war of all against all. Like things would descend into chaos. So yeah, it sounds like under the Hobbesian view, humans need to be kept in line pretty strictly, pretty severely. So in a sense of belief in karma, and hence a kind of form of punishment that awaits after, perhaps, if justice has failed to be met out during the person's time alive, then belief in hell would be that. Yeah, I hadn't thought of putting it in terms of karma, but yeah, like for people who think that karma is something that like has to be fulfilled, and like if somebody acts wrongly but doesn't get punished for it, then like the balance in the universe is out of whack and like karma has to be satisfied. Yeah, if you hold that kind of view, then I suppose you might be drawn to the idea of hell as a way of sort of satisfying the balance of karma, so to speak. So I'm not endorsing hell, and it's an ideal method of social engineering, carrots greater than the stick. But since that's likely what it was intended as, arguing about it on another basis is questionable. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure I follow when it says arguing about it on another basis. Like arguing that hell doesn't exist on another basis, or like arguing that we should give up hell. Yeah, I might have to think about it a little more to make sure I fully understand the comment. But let's see. A method of social engineering. But since that's likely what it was intended as. Yeah, perhaps it was intended, at least initially, as just, a way of social engineering. I guess that's the kind of question it's really hard to answer definitively. But I do think, regardless of how it was intended, at least I find interesting the question of, like, what are the arguments for and against it? And also just the question of, is this something that's compatible with the idea of a loving God? Like, would a loving God implement an afterlife system that involves hell, especially like if it's an eternal hell? Because I know that for many, like especially those who are sort of drawn to Christianity, this is a difficult question. And I've had lots of conversations with people about this, and it's one that different people will take different views on. But certainly there are some who will try to argue that, like, yes, as harsh as it might seem, even a loving God would implement hell like as a manner of divine justice, like serving justice to those who have done wrongly, those who have not been saved from their sin. So I have never found those defenses very plausible myself, but they are out there. Like, some people do really believe this. If there's anybody in the chat who holds that kind of view, let me know and we can certainly talk about it. But yeah, to me, just especially when we remember that God is omnipotent, it seems to me, and this was perhaps really the only way like any of us can approach it, is sort of imagining what we would do with omnipotence, like we with our moral sense, imperfect as it might be. But whatever moral sense we might have, whatever moral sense I have, inclines me to think that if I were all powerful, like, I would do whatever I could to prevent suffering, or at the very least, like, to prevent like intense suffering or gratuitous suffering. And to me, hell just seems to go very much against that. Like, I just can't bring myself to believe that the best afterlife system that a perfect, all-powerful God could come up with would involve imposing such a massive degree of suffering on so many beings. TP Ninja, my earlier comment regarding questioning the existence of hell was in context of why even talk about it in the first place. Okay, I see. Yeah, thanks for the follow-up. Terraditto says, I do like the mention of eternal damnation being bafflingly harsh. I consume media with reincarnation, so I just kind of forgot eternity is a damn long time. That's one thing it's always easy to forget in these discussions, is none of us really has experience of living eternally. And the longest time frame we can possibly imagine would fail to be any appreciable fraction of eternity. To me, that's just insane to think about. Now, that said, I still do think it would be good, like if I know I've gone to this in earlier streams, if I had the option of being given eternal life or just like ending my existence now once and for all, I would choose the eternal life. I'm not sure if I would choose that if like the eternal life was eternal life in hell. But there at least was a time in my life when I did think that, like, even if I am fated to be in hell, or even if I end up getting sent to hell, at least I will still exist. Like, it's better that I still go on existing, even in great pain, than just ceasing to exist. And I don't know if I can quite say I believe that anymore. I think that there is a threshold of suffering, perhaps, beyond which the things that make my life valuable to me would no longer be able to be actualized. It's like if the suffering was so intense that I could not focus on anything else, then yeah, perhaps at that point it would be better for my existence just to outright end. But at the very least, I suppose one thing I could say is that even if it turns out that I do end up in hell, it's not all downsides, you know? There is the upside, which is that I still exist. And I think insofar as I'm a person who tries to actualize love and treating others well, being, you know, a morally good person, at least in general, being a loving person, that's something I will bring with me to the extent that I'm able. And so I will, to that extent or in that way, be somebody who makes the space around me, even if it's in hell, a place of love. At least that's what I would endeavor to do. I liked the teacher mentioning how zombie movies are basically that, all against all. Yeah, that's a good parallel, like with this idea of the state of nature, like the Hobbesian state of nature, where there's no government and humans are just kind of like each person is at war with everyone else. It is kind of similar to how the apocalypse or like the post-apocalyptic landscape is portrayed in zombie movies, I guess. Although I guess in zombie movies, like there are still at least sometimes like groups of humans that kind of band up to like help each other out. So maybe that's a slight difference. Although maybe not. I mean, I guess it feels a lot more similar to Hobbes' vision than something like, let's see, what would another alternative be? Well, I guess the nature of society, you might say, in like the post-apocalyptic zombie movies, yeah, it does feel closer to the Hobbesian state of nature than like our current society. I support your conjecture that religion without hell could better coexist with secularism, though. Yeah, I like to think that it would. Like when I think that it's, well, sorry, what's the best way to put this? I think that like those who believe in hell, and not just like believe in it on an abstract level, but really believe it on a more experiential or more visceral level, you might say, like those who genuinely grasp the implications, like what hell would mean, what this eternal suffering would mean. I think that it really can tear them apart, like very easily, like inside this thought, like especially if they have family members who don't share their beliefs or friends who don't share their beliefs, or even if they're just like an empathetic person who is thinking about and very, you know, concerned about the state of all these people who on their beliefs will be spending an eternity suffering. Yeah, I'd like to think that, well, I mean, of course, there are some people who believe that, but maybe don't have much compassion and just think like, oh yeah, the people in hell will be getting what they deserve. But I have encountered like plenty of other people who seem to be, like in some cases, genuinely distraught about the prospect of being separated from their loved ones in the afterlife, and that their loved ones will suffer and that people will suffer. And I just think that it would make me so sad to believe this. Not that something being sad is a reason to think it's not true, of course, but I do think that it would just lead to so much less mental anguish if people did not have this belief in hell. I think that it would be a much more humane philosophy, humane religion, and would just lead to better mental health if people were to have like either a more universalist view or a more secularist view. But like even if it's still a religious view, I think going into the direction of universalism would make things a lot better in that regard. I will say that your valuation of hell based on what the afterlife means to you is really poetic and very Axaeon. Oh, thank you, Tia. That means a lot. Yeah, it's something that I've thought about for, I guess, a pretty fair amount of time. And in fact, this was one of the things that really got me into philosophy. I don't know if I've sort of told this story on stream before, but I think, back when I was sort of in high school and like first starting to think about these things, I knew I didn't really share the beliefs of like the people around me at my school. And probably the main reason why had to do with hell. Like I just thought that there was something a little too cruel about it, and it just didn't seem to me like what a loving God would do. But it was through the process of kind of thinking that out and talking about it with them that sort of led me to be interested in questions of philosophy of religion at the very least, and kind of branching out from that into philosophy more generally. That wasn't the only sort of inspiration to philosophy for me, but it was one of them. It was one of the things that got me into it kind of early on. But with all that said, I think probably I will head out in just a minute. Because again, it is getting kind of warm down here. But I want to make sure I've addressed everything people say. I don't want anyone to feel left out. Terradito says, back when I was a young boy. Musical note. Thank you for the musical interlude, Terradito. I think that is something that hell could kind of use, you know? Because like right now, you might hear like there's no background music. Could use a little music here. I'm trying to think of something that would go well with the setting. Maybe some like heavy metal would at least like fit, you know, the setting quite well. Maybe if I come here again, maybe I'll bring some like heavy metal with me to really get in the mood, you know. But thank you all for stopping by the stream. I enjoyed reading this with you and thinking through these issues with you. And wherever the rest of your evening takes you, I hope that it does not involve taking you to hell. I hope that it takes you to places that are much more pleasant. Tia says, different culture, but what do you think of Buddhist hell, which you can reincarnate from and get another chance? So yeah, I don't know as much about Buddhism, but I will say that the idea of a hell that like you're not bound to eternally, like you're just punished there for a time, but then you get to kind of reincarnate from it. I think that's a lot better than the Christian view of hell, or like the sort of infernalist traditional eternal hell that we've been kind of focusing on this evening. As for whether it's the best kind of afterlife, or like is it the kind of afterlife that I would implement, like if I were God? I mean, yeah, if I were God, I don't think I would have like any hell at all. I just wouldn't really see a need for people to be punished in the afterlife. So I guess my view is like here on Earth, we punish people for instrumental reasons. I mean, I know some people think it's a matter of justice and like there are retributivist reasons. I'm skeptical of retributivism. So like on my view, the only reasons for punishing people here on Earth that we use would be instrumental. Like for example, we might punish someone by sending them to prison, but like the real value of that, the real reason why we're doing it is, say, like to protect other people. Like if this is a dangerous person and we don't want them being out in society, like maybe we'll send them to prison just so like other people are protected. Or we might punish them like as a way of trying to rehabilitate them, like in some cases at least. And so like all of those instrumental reasons are like something that we have to operate from because we don't have godlike powers. Like our powers as humans are very limited. And so we just have to use these measures of like punishing people in the hope of accomplishing these other goals. But I think if we had godlike powers, like if we, or at least if I had the power to do anything, to do whatever I wanted, then I think I would just actualize those states of affairs of like rehabilitation, for example. I think I would just go straight for like the rehabilitation without the need for punishment as an intermediary. That could be just me. If hell is hell, what the hell? Okay, very nice aphoristic little comment there. See, we're sort of couching our thoughts in riddles here. Background makes you look like an arsonist. Oh no. Yeah, it kind of does, I guess. But I promise I did not start this fire. It was already here when I came in. It doesn't seem to have any signs of slowing down. I think this is just one of the properties of hell, is that the fires here just seem to last for a really long time. Wish I had brought my stick and marshmallows. But again, I think that, yeah, that's pretty much all of the main thoughts that I have on hell, I would say. Although I suspect that this topic probably will come up again, or at the very least, like other topics in philosophy of religion will probably come up in some future streams. For later this month, I will be doing some more spooky gaming, and also I think at some point doing some spooky philosophy. So like other ideas that are maybe linked to fear and philosophy and things that people are afraid of. So that'll maybe be next week or the week after. In the meantime, thanks again, everybody. And I hope that you have a nice non-hellacious, difficult word to say, non-hellacious rest of your evening. But I will see you all real soon. So in the meantime, take care. Bye, everybody.